So in this video, we're going to be comparing the 1DX Mark III to the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. Just a disclaimer, I'm not going to be talking about everything about both of these cameras because if I did, then I would be here all day. But I'm pretty much just going to talk about the stuff that are important to me that might not be important to you. So I'm sorry in advance. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is the build quality between these two cameras. As far as build quality goes, I'm going to have to give it to the Canon 1DX Mark III. This camera feels like a tank. It's an absolute beast. I am not worried about dropping this thing at all. It feels awesome. It looks awesome. It has that DSLR form factor that people might not like, but as far as build quality of this camera, it's fantastic. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is the screen. Now between these two cameras, I'm gonna have to give it to the Canon 1DX Mark III. It's really nice, high resolution. I can see in bright daylight situations. When I had both of these cameras side by side in the same exact lighting scenario outside, I was able to see the 1DX Mark III a lot better than I can with the Pocket 4K, even with the Pocket 4K's brightness turned all the way up. So for screen quality, it's gonna have to be the 1DX Mark III. The next topic we're gonna talk about are inputs on both of these cameras. Now for this one, I'm gonna have to give it to the Pocket 4K just because of two things. One, the Pocket 4K has full HDMI input and it also has XLR. The audio input on the 1DX Mark III is just a 3.5mm, which there's nothing wrong with it, but I rather have an XLR or at least a mini XLR on the Pocket 4K. So when it comes to inputs, I'm gonna have to give it to the Pocket 4K. So the next topic is gonna be media or media costs. So the CFast 2.0 cards is really not that much more cheaper than the Express cards that the 1DX Mark III uses. However, I am gonna have to give it to the Pocket 4K just because you can record in a cheaper T5 SSD with the Pocket 4K. Now you can use an external recorder, but it's not gonna record raw on the 1DX Mark III. So when it comes to media and media cost, I'm gonna have to give it to the Pocket 4K because you can record in T5 SSD, you can record in CFast 2.0 card, and you can record in SD cards. The next topic we're gonna talk about is the mount. Now the Canon 1DX Mark III is a Canon camera lens mount. However, the Pocket 4K is a micro four thirds mount. That means you can get speed boosters on this thing, which a lot of people actually really like. It increases your light intake by a stop and a third, and it does increase your field of view when using speed booster. So when it comes to mount versatility, I'm gonna have to give it to the Pocket 4K because you can get a lot of speed boosters, adapters on the Pocket 4K. On the Canon 1DX Mark III, you're pretty much stuck with the Canon mount. Which brings us to the next topic when it comes to stops of light, which is low light capability. Here's the thing about the low light capabilities between these two cameras. So with the Pocket 4K, you can see more in the dark. However, at high ISO settings above 6400 ISO, the 1DX Mark III is darker. However, the 1DX Mark III at high ISOs, it might seem darker without doing any post corrections or brightness corrections in post, but it is cleaner than the Pocket 4K. The Pocket 4K gets pretty noisy after 6400 in my opinion. So if you don't mind the noise, then the Pocket 4K wins. But if you're thinking about clean and high ISOs, I'm gonna have to give it to the 1DX Mark III. Next topic is gonna be dynamic range. I am gonna have to give this to the Pocket 4K. On paper, the 1DX Mark III has 12 stops of dynamic range, and the Pocket 4K has 13 stops of dynamic range. When doing a test, I can say that the Pocket 4K has a little bit more dynamic range than the 1DX Mark III, especially at higher ISOs like 800. Additionally, that being said, because the Pocket 4K has more dynamic range, highlight recovery is gonna be better with the Pocket 4K. So dynamic range and highlight recovery in post-production will go to the Pocket 4K. All right, next up, we're gonna talk about frame rates between these two cameras, or high frame rates or slow motion between the two. I am gonna have to give it to the Pocket 4K just because you can actually set custom frame rates in camera. The 1DX Mark III, you're pretty much set to 60 frames per second, 50 frames per second, 120 frames per second, and that's pretty much it. If you've been following me for a while, you know that my sweet spot when it comes to slow motion is 48 frames per second and not 60. So Pocket 4K will win slow motion just because you can customize frame rates in camera. The next topic we're going to talk about is the recording option on both of these cameras. Now for the recording options, I'm going to have to give it to the 1DX Mark III just because it has a lot more recording options than the Pocket 4K. Granted, the Pocket 4K has B-RAW and ProRes, and that's pretty much all you need. But I know a lot of people out there still don't use RAW, but instead they rather have more options for MP4, H.264, H.265. So if we're looking at it that way, the 1DX Mark III has a lot more recording options than the Pocket 4K. All right, next up is powering or battery life. As you can see, the 1DX Mark III's battery is ginormous. So obviously, the 1DX Mark III will win against the Pocket 4K because we all know the Canon LPE6 batteries on the Pocket 4K really doesn't last that long. Okay, so the next two topics we're going to talk about, the Pocket 4K doesn't have at all, and that's stabilization and autofocus. Pocket 4K does not have autofocus or stabilization. Now in my previous tests, I absolutely don't give a crap about these two things, but the 1DX Mark III changed my perspective when it comes to stabilization and autofocus. They're just absolutely one of a kind. They really pushed the envelope on that, and that's all I gotta say about that. Which brings us to the next topic of other features. The 1DX Mark III is a full frame stills camera as well. So when it comes to other features, the Pocket 4K is kind of just like a one-trick pony. It's a really good cinema camera, but it's not a good stills camera. So special features or other features, I'm gonna have to give it to the 1DX Mark III. All right, so which brings us to the last thing that I'm gonna be talking about between these two cameras is the price point. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera is a video camera with a little bit of stills capability, priced at $1,200, while the 1DX Mark III is probably the best hybrid video and stills camera out there that I know of, but it's gonna set you back $6,400. So if we are only comparing video specs, which really that's all I care about, I just can't justify right now spending $6,400 to replace my Pocket 4K, which I am using right now. So even though the 1DX Mark III beats the Pocket 4K as far as how amazing a camera can be, I just can't justify spending that much money for doing things like this, just YouTube channel. For me, still the best bang for the buck is the Pocket 4K. Alright, so if you absolutely like this video, please subscribe and like this video because this is my last year with this whole YouTube influencer thing. If you guys want me to keep comparing cameras and reviewing cameras, please do hit the like button and the subscribe button. If you guys have any questions, let me know, and I will see you guys later.